Hello, welcome to episode 69 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1,001 movies you must see before you die. We're done with the Buñuel films for the moment. Some interesting reviews for sure. Looking back on them now, episodes 67 and 68, I do feel like I treat them a bit too harshly, but it is what it is, and I want to thank everyone for their comments where they disagreed, but they didn't take offense to the way I saw those two films. So that was good and rewarding to me, that I was able to vent and get some stuff off my chest, and people didn't take it the wrong way. That was great. We're all adults here. Thank you. Now, Paths of Glory, this is the film we're talking about in this episode from 1957, Stanley Kubrick. I did do a Blu-ray review of this yesterday on my channel, so anyone who's following this at the time of posting this video, it's me talking about Paths of Glory again, but I'm going to be talking about it in more depth here. So I purposely tried to be a little bit vague and wanted to get really deep into this film in this video. Well, not deep, but deeper than I did yesterday with the last video. So, Paths of Glory, early Stanley Kubrick film, his fourth feature film, and for me I think the earliest, well I haven't seen his earlier films, but apparently from what people are saying as well, the first Kubrick film that felt like a Kubrick film when you're looking back at it retrospectively from the rest of his career. Just the way that he places the camera in these films, the way that the shots look from the wide angle lenses to the scope of some of the scenes. Like there's a lot of scenes take place in this big kind of stately building, and it's got these huge kind of rooms and these like massive paintings that look like 50 foot long, like it's crazy. And then of course the battle scenes. This is a World War I film. It's about French soldiers and a move to attack and take over a German stronghold called the Ant Hill on the battlefield. Kirk Douglas, the legendary Kirk Douglas, worked with Kubrick again on Spartacus. But I feel like this is more of a Kubrick film than Spartacus was. And I know that there was some, I think Spartacus was going to be directed by someone else, Kubrick took over, something like that. It doesn't feel like a Stanley Kubrick film, as great as I think Spartacus is. So it's great to see Kirk Douglas in a film that really feels Kubrick-esque. And I'm hammering home that point, but I can't stress enough how much I love the way this film was directed, the way that it looks, and all the decisions that Kubrick must have made in the making of this film. Some brilliant actors in this, like a lot of the secondary characters are really strong, and there's a lot of conflict going on there. There's these two generals who are really kind of overseeing everything that we see in the film, and I like how, you know, World War I, huge, but like you're really focusing on this one little battle among probably hundreds, maybe even thousands that took place, and this one spot, this one trench, and I loved how it kind of I suppose it was what I brought to it, but I loved how it went into a different area than I thought it would. I thought it was going to be an all-out warfare film, all about on the battlefield, all about that struggle, and when the film set up this anthill, what they called the German stronghold at the time, what they were building up to, I thought that was going to be the whole film, trying to take over this position that the German army held, with the French army advancing towards them. But it actually kind of, that goes up to about the middle of the film, and then we go into a completely different kind of setting for the film, which is mainly military, and there is a kind of a court scene. You know, it delves into the repercussions of a certain battle. So the opening, we get these two generals talking about how, you know, they need to make an advance towards this German stronghold, and they're saying, well, it's pretty much impossible, but we're going to do it anyway to kind of make us look good. So they get Kirk Douglas, who is a Colonel Dax, I believe was his name in the film, and he runs this particular trench that's right next to the anthill, and they say, we want you to take the anthill, and he says, that's impossible. And the general's saying, well, you know, you'll lose probably 5% of your men on the way over there, probably about 20% in the wires, you know, probably another 25% once you get to the anthill, but you've got enough to, you know, to take it over. Theoretically, you know, mathematically, statistically. And Kirk Douglas is saying, so you're telling me I'm going to lose more than half of my men? And he's like, well, fine then, I'm going to relieve you of your duty. So I mean, it's a lot about the power play and the people who had this power and how they were abusing it. Even down to the people in the trenches. There are a couple of soldiers in the trenches, and you get kind of a little bit of backstory on them, and I liked how quick and efficient this film was, and giving us these little bits of backstory. There's one soldier who says, you know, I used to go to school with that guy, and the problem that we have is that he thinks I don't respect him, and he's right, you know. So you have this little, just this tiny little micro story within the rest of the film, and it really plays out towards the end as well. So I like those little links, those threads. The pace is phenomenal. It's an hour and a half. Like, every scene feels justified. There doesn't feel like any wasted frames in this film. It moves really, really nicely, and the whole time I was wondering what's going to happen, you know, where is this going to lead, and so on. The war scenes are phenomenal. Second to none. I was saying to someone online that I think that this film features probably the most effective and affecting scene of war in terms of the battlefield that I've ever seen. That was previously held by the Japanese film The Human Condition, and I said, bearing in mind I haven't seen Saving Private Ryan yet, and someone said, well, once you see that, that's going to change. But for now, the war scene in the middle of this film is unbelievable. This amazing shot, or shots even, of Kirk Douglas, Colonel Dax, walking through the trenches, readying his men for battle, and they're all kind of huddled against the side of the trenches, and you're seeing his point of view as the camera is kind of moving very fluidly through the trenches. This nightmarish vision of the trenches and war, you know, and there's explosions going off all over the place. There are bits of mud, rock, dirt flying down, hitting people on the head. It feels so authentic and so real, and the sound, the visuals, I mean, this film looks great. It's shot in black and white, and I watched it on Blu-ray, so it just looked phenomenal, and it was just a real harrowing visual and oral kind of experience, you know. And then finally, when Kirk Douglas jumps up the ladder on top of the trenches, gets his whistle out, and he's like, come on, let's go, and they start storming the battlefield. There's explosions going off everywhere, and I just suddenly felt like the horror of what it must have been like to be in that situation, storming against bombs going off all around you, your fellow soldier, your fellow friends getting blown to smithereens right next to you. And I teared up a bit because it was that powerful to me. It got to me. It was overwhelming. I really thought they did an amazing job with that, and it was phenomenally shot. I mean, the way that they had set up this battlefield to look like one of the World War I battlefields was great. Winston Churchill commented that the war scenes in this were highly accurate to what it was like in World War I. The trenches were widened from the World War I standard of 4 feet to 6 feet to allow Kubrick to get the camera into that tracking shot. And I'm glad that he did, because that was the highlight of the film for me. That one scene, no words, just Kirk Douglas just kind of marching through with a purpose on his face, explosions going off all around him. I think it's one of the great scenes of all time. I thought it was incredible. But then you go on and you have this, again, the power play. And because, again, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I don't want to spoil anything for people moving forward, and it probably isn't spoiling anything, but I like to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. So before I continue talking about this, well, I'll talk a little bit more, actually, before I get to that stuff, because I want to give people who haven't seen the film a bit more, I suppose. The acting's great, you know, from the secondary characters down to Kirk Douglas. I mean, Kirk Douglas definitely is playing a character who is kind of like, oh, he's sticking it to the man, and maybe it's a little bit too kind of bravado, I suppose, to the point of maybe being unrealistic, that there would be a colonel who would stand up to the generals and his higher-ups in this way. But very much it shows you people who have this power and how they can abuse it and use it to their own needs and things like that. And as I said, even down to the people in the trenches who have a little bit of authority over the other soldiers, they're abusing their kind of power as well. There's a great scene where these three guys go out on a night reconnaissance mission. Looks amazing. Again, the way this film is shot, I can't say enough good things about it. And yeah, so Kirk Douglas was great. And yeah, I think that's about covers it. You know, is it a film you must see before you die? And then we'll get into some spoilers. Yes, it's absolutely a film you must see before you die. It is one of the finest war films I've ever seen. Would definitely put it in my top 5 war films. I thought it was great because it deals with, for me, my favourite war films are films that deal with the repercussions of war. And while this doesn't really deal with repercussions of the war in the way that I like seeing, like the civilians, you know, the people who aren't in the battlefield, but how it affects them anyway. Films like Good Morning Vietnam, in a way. I think that's a phenomenal war film. You know, you wouldn't think it, you know, Robin Williams comedy film, but there's some serious moments in that, and it really shows you how people who are kind of outside of it get affected. Films like Grave of the Fireflies, you know, people dealing with the horrors of war, even though they're not in the war, but dealing with the repercussions of everything that's happening around them and being in close proximity to these wars. But this had kind of the best of both worlds, because you had that battlefield stuff, the warfare, and then you also had the fallout within the army of what had taken place. And one criticism, I said it in the video for the Blu-ray review, that one criticism I can level at the film is that it is, you know, about French soldiers in the French army, you know, in the World War One, in World War One, and they're all played by American actors. So it's you know, and speaking English, but it's just a conceit you have to give way to when it comes to films like this, and you know, it is what it is. So. Is it a film to see before you die? Absolutely yes, it is essential in my opinion. Alright, so should we get into some spoiler talk? And I'm not, well, yeah, let's just get into spoiler talk. A lot of you people have seen this film, so we can do that, we can discuss it. Here we go. So, Paths of Glory, again, what I loved was that we had the war scenes, and then we have the fallout, which is that their advance on the anthill failed. And so they withdrew back. There was no way they were going to take that stronghold. And, you know, the general is pissed off about it, to the point where he even orders his own men to fire on his own men. And that comes back to bite him in the arse later on. I liked how he was served his just desserts at the end of the film because of that. And in that way, he was kind of a great villain. This film was even banned in France initially because of the way it portrayed the French army in a negative light. And I love films that do this. This is an anti-war film, I feel. And I love films that that give you that anti-war message, but they aren't afraid to, well, I suppose it's different in this case because it's an American film criticizing the French army, because this was based on a true story about a certain number of soldiers who were selected for execution because of a failed advance. And that's what happens in the film. You get 3 soldiers who are randomly selected for execution to make an example to the rest of the soldiers who didn't succeed in their advance on the stronghold. And then you get the trial scene, which is phenomenal with Kirk Douglas. Just his acting is incredible in that scene in particular. His voice really commands that scene and what he's saying and fighting against this injustice, and the way he puts it is just is perfect. And again, the script to that end, it was great too, because the words that are written just seem to really fit the situation perfectly for me. Not that I would know, but you know, it all seemed to gel together from everything. The way the film was shot, the way it was acted, the way that it was written and performed, all that stuff, and choreographed from the war scenes as well, and the explosions. It looked very dangerous for a lot of those actors, I have to say. Films like The Human Condition is probably a better example of a film where the filmmakers are not afraid to criticize themselves as a nation, because you had a Japanese filmmaker like Masaki Kobayashi who made this 9-hour film about how terrible certain aspects of the Japanese army was in World War II. Was it World War II? I'm pretty sure it is. I might be wrong on that, shit. I'm almost entirely certain it is, but either way, it criticizes the Japanese army, and so that was controversial as well. And I think we need to do that. We need to recognize when people in our nation's armies and all sorts of stuff like that, like politicians, have done the wrong thing, and that needs to be highlighted because it is a cautionary tale. And hopefully, you would think this would make us kind of learn from these mistakes. It doesn't always work out like that, but I like it when that happens. Again, it doesn't quite apply to Paths of Glory because it's an American film that's criticizing the French army, but it was banned in many countries, in fact, which is interesting. Controversial, was not a success at the box office. It was made for just under $1 million, and most of that went to Kirk Douglas's salary, but you wouldn't believe it. Well, I suppose it's different back then. $1 million in 1956, 57 is a lot more than it is now, but I mean, those scenes, the war scenes, the battle scenes, they're just, they're top notch. They are absolutely top of the line. It just seems like all the money went into those scenes, and that's probably for the best. So you get these 3 soldiers who have been randomly selected for execution, and I just loved all of the court scenes, you know, and it might seem boring to some people, but it was plotted so well. The scenes felt so efficient. I didn't feel like it was dragging at any point in the film whatsoever. And we lead into the final moments of the film where these 3 soldiers, you know, Kirk Douglas has tried his best to campaign for these guys to not get executed because there isn't good grounds, sufficient proof that they were indeed, you know, acting like cowards. So the act of cowardice, you know, was not in play for these 3 guys, and you can't prove it. But nonetheless, the generals, they had to do it to maintain their own kind of, to save their face, basically. And so you get that scene where they're marching them out, and the one guy is just, he can't handle it, and he's crying, and he's praying to the father next to him, you know, just please help me and just give me the strength to get through this and all that. And it's a powerful moment, and it's a scene where it's building to the end of the film, and you've got drums constantly, drums building up the tension. And it's funny because the last film I reviewed for this series, Age of Gold, had 3 or 4 minutes of just drums at the end, and it didn't fit whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. It didn't build up to anything. Whereas this, the drums were there, and I was thinking, hey, it's drums again, but they're serving a purpose. They are building up my anticipation of this, like what is going to happen, because you know, it felt like, I mean, I felt like suddenly Kirk Douglas was going to run out and just start shooting everyone and save the day in some way, shape or form, but no, they get shot, you know, and it's a horrific scene. It was not horrific, but the idea of it is horrific, I suppose, when you just see these three guys get shot dead. And a brilliant shot when they're getting walked up, you know, outside. There's this big kind of, you know, crowd there to see it and spectate, and you see Kirk Douglas looking at them, and there's just a shot of him looking as they go past, and it's kind of their point of view, and it is brilliantly done. And I thought, wow, they went there, and that's probably for the best, because that is what happened, and it's presenting a more truthful depiction of the things that went on during that war, and many wars, I suppose. And then the final scene I thought was wonderful. I really wasn't sure where they were going with it. Kirk Douglas walks past this bar, and there's all these rowdy soldiers there before they're about to be sent back off to the trenches, and there's a guy on stage, and he drags this woman, tears streaming down her face, and says, you know, come on, she's got no talent whatsoever, she's got a nice body, but she's going to sing you a song, and everyone's just jeering at her and like, yeah, go on, you know, and it's horrible. I thought it was horrible, hard to watch. Tears streaming down her face, so she starts singing, but they're screaming too loud, and they can't even hear what she's saying, like, yeah, go on, and they're like smacking their lips and all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly they just, their voices start fading, and they start hearing her sing, and they quiet down, and they quiet down, and they're even saying stuff like, you know, they're criticizing, because she's German as well, I forgot to mention, this German girl, so she's singing this German song, and they're saying stuff like criticizing her language and stuff, and obviously it's the French versus the German, but her voice just starts to carry, and they stop, and they kind of start to see the humanity in her, and they see how humiliated she is, but also the spirit that she has, I suppose, and the purity of what she was doing, just standing there singing the song. I mean, forced against her will, but there was just this vital thread of humanity in what she was doing. In some way, that's what I felt, and they stopped, and they started tearing up, and they started humming along, and then singing along very slowly, and it was just a beautiful moment. And I think it said in the book itself that it's probably the most emotional scene that Kubrick has ever directed. You know, a lot of people say that Kubrick's films are very unemotional, and I can see that point of view, and this is definitely, for me, I think probably the most poignant scene that Kubrick has ever directed, from what I've seen of most of his filmography. And this woman who played the German girl, who was German in fact, ended up being Kubrick's wife. He married her, and they stayed together until his death, so that's kind of a sweet story as far as the behind the scenes goes. But I think that it was a really interesting way to end the film. It gives you that glimmer of hope for people at the end there, a nice little beat, and you kind of see Kirk Douglas kind of observing this from outside of the bar, and I thought it was a really nice way, a nice touch to end the film. It was a quiet moment, well, not a quiet moment because they're all screaming and stuff, but by the end, you know, it felt like a quiet kind of, there's still some hope left for people, you know, and I really like that, because when you go to the scene before that, when the three guys get executed, it's kind of like, is there any hope for people? You know, it's a great kind of duality there at the end, and I really like that conflicting kind of message, I suppose, because that's what life is. It's just that conflicting thing. You see things every day, and you think like, man, there's hope for people yet, you know, and then you see other things, and you're like, man, there's fucking no hope for us, you know. So it's what it is. It represented to me that kind of universal message, and but apart from that, it's just a phenomenally made film. So it definitely is a film I see before you die. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.